Wimbleway, Wimbleway, a Wimbleway. Do 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 do. That's slowly working. Okay. So right, I need my notes on the Shaggy guy. Okay. Getsu Mori. Oh, that's just. Oh, Hagetsu? Hagetsu? Hiroshi? Yeah, it was Hagetsu. That's the Shaggy one. That's the one who liked boys as well as girls, wasn't it? Okay. We'll see. We'll see. Alright. Alrighty, righty. Yeah. Ceremony Hidetsu. Yes, that's who I was talking about. Not Hagetsu, Hidetsu. Hello everyone, how are we doing today? How goes the world? Today's question, today's discussion, is this. It is a turtle ship May. Yi San Sin. Okpo, Happo, Geokin Jimbo, and Sacheon. Now, for the year of leadership, this is actually an obvious one for someone like me to do, because, let's be honest, it's fun, and it's some naval history which we don't often get to talk about, exactly how the Koreans do in quite an interesting war. But, and I will say this quite heavily, what we're talking about today has many permutations. It's rather a fun system like that. There are multiple permutations and issues with it, and multiple plays to wander around it. I'd also say some of the people are incredibly interesting, and if you're already fascinated by Japanese culture, oh, you're in for a fun one, because we have a guy who's a shogun, but not a shogun because he's a peasant-born gentleman, and his general descent into madness, potentially. Otherwise, he was also he turned from being very politically astute to being absolutely useless, which, if we consider the recent legacy of Game of Thrones on television, is not an impossibility, considering what happened to Tyrion Lannister, but the actual reality is different. The actual reality is different. Now, with that all being said, and with my screen being sorted out, and actually, to an extent, working, to an extent, he says, working, please note it's to an extent, oh, good lord, at some point you will work for me, screen, at some point you will work for me, oh, friggity-do, friggity-day, please work. Oh, yeah, you go there. You go there. This is why normally I do this stuff before we get started, but today I was having fun. Floss were happy. Floss enjoyed it though. Now, I have to admit, there's a whole lot of phrases which I have only managed to learn how to pronounce off Google, so I could be completely wrong. I'd like that noted before we get into this too far, because if I do them completely badly, please note it's no insult was meant. It's just how I'm pronouncing them based off what Google has told me. And please note that's based off what Google has told me. Hello to both Twitch and YouTube. How are you all doing? As you can see, I've got the list of things we have coming up. I actually recorded this after I'd recorded the Mad Destroyer Captains video, which is coming out tomorrow. So Mad Destroyer Captains has disappeared from this one, but that technically comes out the day after this one. But, you know, that's coming out tomorrow. Yeah, and considering, he was not very old when he died. The fact he was allowed to retire is an interesting one. It really is. He was quite literally 53 when he died in 1598. But we are going to be talking about the politics of it. We're going to be talking about some of the leadership issues. We're going to be talking about some Japan and Korea. And they both have their own weird issues going on. They really do. Please note, anyone who goes in saying one was a really great state and the other wasn't hasn't studied the history of the period. I mean, quite literally, the Tokugawa shogunate gets established after this period. And they get established because they kill they basically backstab their way to power. They really do. The Admiral Pertinax video will come out soon, basically. But yeah, Michael Cooch, that's not really the topic right now. But yeah, the Pertinax one will come out soon. It'll come out on a Wednesday, possibly next week, possibly not. Depends on exactly what happens over the weekend. I don't think he's had a warship named after him yet. The Korean Navy would be the Navy to check, and I cannot remember a ship being named for him. But there again, they all have sufficiently enough names that he could have been named for, and it just hasn't been named the right one. I ran into this live because I'm from the Republic of Korea. Thank you, Allies USA. Hopefully, it'll be fun. No, in the Korean Navy it has that name. I didn't think so. I didn't think so, but it's kind of like, how do I put this politely? It's kind of like names for Louis XIV in the Royal Navy. Okay? The Royal Navy took on so many ships from Louis XIV's fleet, capturing them, that there were now more names historically in the Royal Navy's list of roster of names, which are names for Louis XIV, than there are in the French Navy. So I'm always cautious when it comes to leaders from a certain distance back who might have variable names and multiple titles in saying we don't have a ship name for that ship, because you never know, it just might be one of the names, a name of them I don't know about. This is a fun one. DDH 975. Which, yeah, that's the new one. She came into service. Oh, there is one, and she is Chungmung Yi Sun Sin. Oh, good lord! They've added all sorts of things on the name. That is a long one. Anyway. I'm not sure I'd say destroyer. Considering we're talking about the Korean Navy, and this is completely off topic, but this is the way we can sometimes go at the beginning. Considering she's 4,700 tons of standard and 5,000 tons fully loaded, yeah, she's got 64 VLS and the rolling airframe missiles and 8 harpoons and some other things, but yeah, she does speak more frigate to me. Medi, I would agree. Yi Sun Sin does deserve some credit. Does certainly deserve a lot of credit for saving Korea in this particular war, but I'd also say there were sufficient problems that they couldn't fix that actually saying them save Korea. No, Korea took a long time to save itself. Korea took a long, long time to save itself. They had issues. They did. 64 would make her a third-rate ship of line lines. Anyway, so let's start off with the Imjin War. And yes, this is one in a whole series of wars which take place in this period, and yeah, it's basically continual. What you have to remember is that each power will have differing technological advantages. So, the Ming forces, i.e. China at this time, are probably the most powerful and on average technologically advanced. But when it comes to handheld gunpowder weapons, arquebusks, etc., early muskets, the Japanese definitely have a solid advantage in those. However, when it comes to cannon and well-maintained ships, that's the Koreans. Now, why do the Koreans have cannon and well-maintained ships? Because they're continually suffering issues from piracy. However, as we'll be getting into it, just because you keep being invaded by pirates and you keep having problems with borders, doesn't mean you should invest in your armed forces. No, no, no. You should save money and cut taxes. That's what you should do. Even when you're under daily, if not hourly attacks, you should save the money. We'll get into that in a second. There are lots of issues, and this is one of the reasons why, to an extent, some of the history about Yi Sun-sin is played up. He was very good as a leader. He was very capable. But some of the history of him has actually been played up as time has gone on to cover up for the fact that quite a lot of leaders who were bad weren't bad so much as underfunded, under-resourced, and unable to do their jobs because they hadn't been given the equipment to do them. There is at least a couple of naval officers and a couple of generals who fall into that category, who are traditionally, according to sometimes in history, listed as being bad generals. When actually you go, looking at the resources they have allocated to this particular operation, you were... yeah. They've been fun. Thank you, Mercury. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Chung Gone. Thank you, Allies USA. Let's explain that one. It's a fun time. Anyway, the Imjin War starts because, honestly, Toyotomi Hideyoshi has come to power in Japan, has managed to pull Japan together into one possible state, and now he has a large number of soldiers and a large number of forces. He needs to find something to do with them. Because if he doesn't occupy them, Japan has a habit of them going off and causing trouble internally. So he's managed to unite Japan. Yay! We have a load of soldiers. What do we do with them? Well, if we leave them to their own devices, they will probably try and kill each other and kill us. Oh, goody. That's useful to know. Alrighty then. What's the other option? The other option is we send them to invade Korea. Now, one of the really fun things about this is this actually causes the downfall of the party which was right. We'll be getting into Korean party politics at a certain point, but as we're going on this. But realistically, we have some issues we have to deal with before we get into all of that. I have to explain the calendar, okay? I have said these are some battles in May. And to an extent they are. But it depends if you're going by a lunar calendar or a Gregorian calendar, exactly which is in May and which is not. Now, here's the thing. I just decided to leave them in May because it's more fun, it's May, and I fancy doing some Age of Sail stuff in a month which is going to be incredibly dominated by World War II, some World War One stuff because of Jutland, because of leadership in Jutland scenarios, and it's going to have Tsushima in it, but honestly, I wanted to give people some more naval history than that, something broader. So, here we go. I've added it in. I've used the fact that they are listed as May to be, yeah. I would also add, before we go too far into this, there are a lot of complex things going on, but this is a good example, this war, in the problems of having weak leadership from your central state. I.e., the particular monarch at this this time, Seonjo, who I'll be getting into and talking about, was a very weak person. A very, very weak and jealous person. Who was easily swayed. Having a monarch, we've talked about this in past as a theory, a monarch, a, dictator, all these things. They can be effective in giving governments. They can be effective in giving decisive government if they are decisive people who listen to advisors to find out the pertinent information and then make a decision themselves. If they are swayed by who is their favourite as to what they want to do, then they end up in trouble. And Seonjo, what should we say, Raleigh? What should we say about Seonjo? Yeah, basically, whereas I will try and resist for a bit a certain person requesting biscuits, and will probably give in, but, we'll resist for a bit. He would have already had the biscuits in his hand to be going, oh, you're my favourite here, have everything you want. Whereas I'll try and fob him off with a pat. That's good enough, isn't it? The love of your papa, a nice pat, a nose scrunch, that's good enough, isn't it? That's all you need. All you really need. I know, I can hear your brother woofing. I wonder who is standing off now. So, it's a war which is really started and kind of telegraphed, okay? When I say telegraphed, I mean they literally send some ambassadors from the court of Korea, go over there, go over to Japan. And one reports they're massing an army, they're coming. The other one says, oh, they're just consolidating their position, they're just massing troops for that reason. The thing is, if you have a large number of troops and you're not fighting a war, you either have to give them something to do or you have to be disbanding them carefully. Or at least decommissioning them. That wasn't happening in Japan. That wasn't happening. So, you have invasions. And the thing is, Japan is very quickly able to succeed on ground because they come with a large army, which is well trained, well prepared, having been fighting wars for years. And they have a lot of experienced commanders. Very good. But their trouble comes when it comes to sea power, because despite being an island nation, as we'll be getting into this, they are terrible at it. They really are. With that being said, the Korean government. This is Seonjo, the most meh ruler of all time. Please note I am saying meh, because he starts out sounding quite good, you know. He's helping to try and bring in some Confucianism. He's trying to bring in professionalism to the bureaucracy. He's setting up the division. He invites scholars to his court. You know, he has Sim Yu-jeon and Kim Hyun as his two leading scholars, and one is Sim is a relative of the Queen and very, very conservative, whereas Kim was more of a new generation, a new style of. He wanted more liberal reforms, and that splits the court scholars into two factions, which go and live off together and separate, and it's really a classic example in how you don't want your government to run. Because not only do they not really communicate with each other as two sides, they basically treat it as a war between the two. And this becomes the Western and Eastern faction. And these factions, this political system of factioning and scholars, arrives for roughly 200 years. It will eventually bring around the collapse of the Joseon dynasty. But Sacheon, he's the guy who started it. Sunzo. Okay, Sunzo. I keep calling him Seonjo. Sunzo. Sorry. I have no idea why he... Don't get into the hats. I should say that I got most of the pronunciations off Google this afternoon to try and check my pronunciations. So if they are terrible, please feel free to correct me. I will try my best. People who are regular listeners will tell you that I have absolutely no ear for foreign languages and I'm terrible, but I try my best. Well, the thing is, and before people get to too much to giving background, is I've actually been teaching the Imaging War for a while because no one else would teach it in one of the universities I worked in. And it was part of the core course. So I picked it up, went and studied it, read all the books, and have tried to read as many books as I can. And I can honestly tell you two things. One, the books published in the English language are terrible mostly. I will be picturing one which is an okay one, but please note, it's not. There's no great one in English language. And secondly, it's rather interesting example of how not to run a country. Now, the thing is, how do I put this politely? Sun Tzu, he is, how do I put this politely about him? He starts off being flattered by the Western faction, because they are flattering him, but he actually becomes completely captured by the Easterners. And the Easterners are the heavily conservative ones. They are the ones who believe in various reforms they want to do. They want to slow down reforms. In fact, the Easterners end up... Here's the thing. The Easterners end up not just dividing over what they want to do, but they end up dividing into a Northern and Southern faction. It gets even more fun. The politics of his government become terrible. And one of the fun things is that when he has to send his delegates to go to Japan, he has to send them from different factions to balance it. He actually sends one from the Western faction, one from the Eastern faction, to balance. I kid you not, to balance the reports, and then ignores the report he doesn't like. And not only does he ignore the reports, he then executes the Easterners' plan, who reported that he didn't need to worry about his troops, to reduce funding for the armed forces. And it couldn't be worse if you tried. And when they literally return, after these delegates return, they are in the middle of cutting when they get delegates come from Japan. And those delegates ask permission to pass through the Korean peninsula to invade China. Now, that is de facto declaring war, because if China, which is an ally of China, Korea, which is an ally of China at this point, it's the Ming Dynasty, allows the Japanese to go through, that's breaking their alliance. If they don't, then the only way they're going to get through is by actually, how do I put this, fighting a war. So it's de facto a declaration of war. Now, this is a problem, because they've been consistently not funding the improvement of forts, and not funding the infrastructure, and not funding the training of sailors and the training of soldiers constantly. They have been consistently cutting that for about the previous decade and a half, because it was peaceful. This is while they were fighting constant problems up on the north, because there were constant issues on the northern border with the Jurchens. The Jurchens in English spelling, I'm probably pronouncing again completely wrong, but they had been causing huge issues. They are also sometimes known as Manchurians, because they come from that area of China. They are a fun piece of history. Okay? And Manchus, I think, is the other phrase that we use for them. But they are a fun group, and they are causing trouble. They are causing issues. And have been causing constantly. So, cutting down the army has meant that, while fighting operations, has meant that you've had less and less of the army in the rest of the country, and the army just concentrating on fighting, and that being smaller and smaller. So the army's all up north, all the way from where the Japanese land, and the fleet has not been being invested in, despite dealing with pirates on quite a few occasions. And so, yeah, the Japanese turn up. And the army basically starts to lose almost immediately. And they keep losing generals. They keep dying. Fighting hard, but they die. It's actually one of the interesting things. If you look at the Imjin War, if you want some fun, because I know this because I went there because I'm hunting pictures, as I often do. I went to Wikipedia to hunt pictures I'm allowed to use. If you go look at the commanders and leaders of the Korean side, every single one, pretty much barring the king and Kwon Yu, dies. They're all dead. They're all listed as killed in action. KIA. Every single one other than the king and one general is killed in action. It's not good. It's really not good. And the Koreans have to spend a lot of time reorganizing themselves to actually fight this war. And still they have trouble with it. It's just... The problem is, you have two groups of the two factions in the Korean government which have been absolutely telling this guy what to do. Pretty much all the time have been telling him what to do. He's either been following one or the other. Neither of them are very good at actual warfare. And Sun Tzu is definitely not good at warfare. He is definitely not good at warfare. Both sides, one side doesn't want to spend any money, but believes you'll win the war by just pummeling troops of them. And the other side believes, well, wants to spend money, but can't agree what to spend money on. Now, you have a lot of different operations going on here, but then you have the Japanese government. And this is fun for a whole different reason. Because when you start studying the Japanese leaders, and this is Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who is there not a shogun, because he was of peasant origin, so he wasn't able to be a shogun, despite the fact that he is the guy who probably manages the second reunification of Japan and the one that stuck. He's made the Kanpaku, the Imperial Regent, and the Daijiden, Chancellor of the Realm. They're roughly the equivalent titles of what we would do. They're not actual translations. They're rough equivalencies of what we would consider the roles to be. He is powerful. He is capable. He's also completely doesn't understand naval warfare. Okay? He comes from a scenario, and we'll be talking about this when we get into the Japanese fleet discussions, of where your fleet is basically a logistics arm, and that is it. It's not a war-fighting tool. It is not a war-fighting tool. It is, however, a war-fighting. It is, however, a war-waging tool, but not a war-fighting tool. Now, how do I describe this particular gentleman in what? Well, for many years, his key assistant was actually his nephew. And if you want to look up him, he's called Toyotomi Hidetsugu. And for quite a while, he sets it up so his nephew is basically acting as Prime Minister, running Japan, while he runs the foreign policy, running the wars and invasions in Korea, etc. However, he then has a son. He has a son. He is proud. He has a son. His nephew, who had up to that point had been his heir, now becomes a problem. So he basically manufactures issues against him and orders his nephew to commit suicide, because that's what you do. And then you go and kill his family, which actually managed to cause him more problems, because that means his own clan fractures. The Toyotomi clan basically fractures because of his actions. What is... There are, if you go and look up Hidetsugu, his nephew, you are going to learn a lot about Japanese history, including, I will just give you a heads up, something called Shudo, which is it was a proud part of their system. It was a Shudo tradition, and he had a number of what are called wakashu, which were young boys, let's say. So, an interesting gentleman, but had been an effective prime minister and keeping things stable in Japan. And one of the issues you have for Japan is it's the internal politics and the death of this guy which actually ends the Imjin War. Not anything the Koreans do. Because whilst the Korean Navy is beating up their logistics system, they're actually not beating it up enough to stop the Japanese from fighting. The victories they have on land are not enough to stop the fighting. Why? Because in many ways the reason the Japanese are fighting, and this has to be understood, is to keep the Japanese soldiers busy. As long as they are fighting in Korea, they are not fighting in Japan. As long as they are fighting in Korea, they're not fighting in Japan. That's something important to remember about this entire saga, is that in many ways, the important thing is the army is over there, not over here. Okay? Army over there, not over here. Which puts a lot of context into this war. There are huge mythologies manufactured out of this conflict. There really are. And Age of Empires, all sorts of things have played their parts in magnifying those mythologies. And like all mythologies, they do have a basis in fact, but often they are romanticizing what was the reality, the real reason. And the real reason is, well, the Joseon kingdom was weak as anything, and Sunzo was useless, and the Japanese have just been through a massive unification war. They have a lot of soldiers. They need to find something to keep them busy. So, this is fun history. Now, by the way, one of the things you should also realize about Hidetsugu, his nephew, is he was prolific. And when I say prolific, I mean as well as having his at least 3 young boys, he also had 2 wives and 7 concubines, and produced many children. At least 4 sons and 3 daughters. Whereas this guy produced 2 sons, one of which who died young, and one of which who survived him, but was very young when he survived him. I can't think why there were issues going on in their relationship. Oh, feudal Japan. Yeah, you're the major military power in the nation, but you have virtually you don't have that many enough children, and your nephew, who is technically your heir, is prolific. Okay, there are issues going on here. But you need to keep the soldiery busy. I'd love to say these were the only problems going on in Japan at this point, but if I tell you that after this period becomes the Council of Five Elders period, there's movies made about that, and eventually it leads to the rise of the Tokugawa shogunate. It's an extremely interesting piece of social and political history. And if this guy had lived longer, there is all sorts of ripples. There are all sorts of potential ripples. Because the council basically ends the war and brings the troops back, because they're worried if the troops learn he's died while they're abroad, they'll come back as an invading army. Whereas if they withdraw them under their own orders while they think he's still alive, they'll be able to withdraw them piecemeal and demobilize them so they don't come back and usurp the council. There is so much politics and things going on. But I want to talk to you about the character we're going to be talking about mostly today, especially when we're talking about battles. We're talking about Yi Sun-sin. Okay? Admiral Yi. And he was an extremely skilled and capable officer. He came from quite a prominent family background, which is one of the reasons why the king really didn't like him. At various points, the king really, really doesn't like him and is jealous of him because he comes from a prominent background, he has a lot of support, and he's capable of doing a lot of different things. So Sun Tzu finds Yi Sun-sin to be problematic at the best of times. In a wartime, it's a problem. Now, you have to remember, he'd passed his military examination in 1576. He'd impressed the judges with his archery. But he'd broken a leg in the cavalry section. So he had to re-enter and pass it again later on. And he serves in a lot of interesting battles, defending the border settlements against the Jurchen marauders. He gets a lot of experience doing that. But he gets accused of desertion during a battle. A charge was led by General Yi, who will be one of the generals who actually dies early on in the war at the Battle of Sangju. And this led to his first imprisonment, his first stripping of rank, and torturing. He was then allowed to fight, released and allowed to fight again as an enlisted soldier. He is then managed to be appointed as commander of a training center, and was then, after that, made a military magistrate. This is perfectly normal for this kingdom, okay? It is perfectly normal for the Joseon kingdom for officers to secure their position by blackmail, lies, generally getting rid of anyone who's promising below them. I can't think why this led to a military force which was easily beaten up by the Japanese. You have a lack of investment from the top, and you have the whole way down the command people trying to get rid of promising juniors who might be a threat to their own position. I cannot think why this was not a military force which was actually competently able to get rid of the Japanese invaders. So, he eventually gets made the commander of the Jeolla province and one of the naval districts. And this was a fairly rapid promotion, but that's probably because he proved himself again, and they're getting to the point where they were getting short of officers who were prepared to serve. It was becoming life-threatening to serve, so people being prepared to serve was a rarity. And finally, he's got command of a naval district. With that being said, he's in charge of building a regional navy at this point. He's building the infrastructure. And he basically does a lot of this off his own back. Some of the stuff he actually funds himself, but he reforms the locals' organization, invests in infrastructure. He does it all himself. He's kind of weird. The other problem you have with the senior officers, as a rule, which doesn't help with the finance issues, is rampant corruption. Again, this is so surprising. When we're talking about the Joseon court, it's so surprising to say rampant corruption. But yes, rampant corruption, which meant not many people were the money didn't always go where it was supposed to. So, whilst we like to say that he has never commanded a naval force before he fights the Japanese, he had actually been in command of ships for quite a while. By the point he's fighting them, and he has actually, how do I put this, been investing quite a lot of time in studying it. He is one of those people who, how do I put this politely? When he gets a job, he makes sure he knows how to do it. He will find the people who will qualify to know what they're doing and have them explain to him. He will find all the books he can on the subject and study them. He will go and read and learn everything he can to be able to do it. So, in that regard, he is one step above... Oh, good lord, no, he's not one step above. He's about 10 steps above, 20 steps ahead, and generally moving well up the mountain in front of most of his other colleagues, okay? There are a few others like him. Believe it or not, he's not as rare as it might be made out to be. But honestly, they are very few smattering of diamonds in what is an absolute total manure patch. It really is of leadership. From a leadership perspective, it is not a good leadership practice to get in the habit of getting rid of promising juniors because they might be a threat to your position. It doesn't build good chains of command. A bookworm is someone who's always in a book. Occasionally having been accused of being a bookworm. I don't see Yi-sun as that. I think he's more a preparation, someone who prepares for things. It's more someone who is prepared to go and learn his trade. He knows what he doesn't know, and he knows he needs to find it out. I'd say more likely he's a control freak. He likes to know everything that's going on, and he likes to be able to know what he's doing about it. Yes. And so, when Japan invades Korea in 1592, he's been in post for at least a year, possibly longer. There's a whole debate of this. And, well, you have to remember also, for the Japanese, even though it was about keeping the army busy, Korea was supposed to be just a forward operating base, a logistics base, a line of support to invade Ming China, which, by the way, did not look strong at this point. And if you want to know how weak it looked, the Spanish were even considering invading and trying to conquer Ming China. I kid you not, there are literally governors of Spanish territories writing back to Spain to go, Philip, we think you could get a pretty nice empire out here. Yeah, lots of silver, lots of money. Come on, Philip, you can do this. So that's what Ming China looks like at this point. It looks weak enough that Spain is considering conquering it, let alone Japan. Spain, with its logistics line being all the way around. Now, please note, by the way, if Spain had actually tried, they would have failed dramatically. It would have been terrible. They would have lost control of it completely. It would never have worked. I am not saying they actually had a chance in hoopla of actually succeeding. But they were looking at it. Now, I'd also say there are some advantages for him in being a naval officer, for Yi Sun-sin and being a naval officer. It's not one of the more coveted posts, and honestly, he's considered no threat to anyone because he's controlling naval power. And as long as he's showing himself to be very absorbed in what he's doing, and very only obsessed with what he's doing, he's not really much of a problem until he becomes a problem. Was China divided? Stekra, that's always a question of was China united? It's Ming China at this point. It's a whole course of videos to really explain. I have entire tomes. Let's see, on China. I have some of them around me. Oh, there's. Look. I don't think this is one on Ming China. I think it's on. Fluff, you could get a book fall on you in a second, so be careful. So yeah. I have books like this on the history of China. And this is volume part 2 of Sung China. Ming China is many, many parts. There are many, many volumes. I think something just fell out the back. I'll deal with that in a second. Oh, hey, caramba. Oh. So, he's capable. He's built his forces up. He's got his infrastructure in place. And there is also a debate as to when he started building his turtle ships. Because there's an honest discussion to be had about whether or not he has the idea for constructing them earlier than they're built. And whether or not he's working on them earlier, and at least their principles, long before they're actually built. Okay, for the war. But this is okay. We are literally this time talking about some battles in May. We're talking about 4 battles. And they are cool battles, but they're not necessarily his most well-known battles, but I think they're interesting. And I think the fact that they all take place in May adds up to it. We're talking about Okpo, Happo, Jeokinjibo, and Sacheon. Okay? And this is very much an introduction to this. Please note, when I've taught this traditionally, I was given 3 3-hour lectures, and well, the students will have had about 6 hours of seminar time, so 9 hours of lecture time and 6 hours of seminar time to go through literally some of the first the 1592 campaigns of Yi Sun-sin. So I am skipping over bits, or rather I am shortening the content down a bit. But I think it's still, hope it's going to be worthwhile, and hope you're going to enjoy it. With that being said, let's talk about the Japanese fleet. Now, believe it or not, the Sekebune are their medium-sized ship, and the Atakebune, these vessels, are the larger ships. Now, Japanese naval theory basically comes down to, we load troops aboard, we go to there, we offload troops, and we have a land battle. We have a land battle. The Japanese logistics train and logistics fleets are critical to their operations, supplying food, resupplying them with gunpowder, resupplying them with shot. All these things are necessary. Their fleet actions are mostly about archers. Now, what you might notice when you're looking at these ships, you're going, Alex, but we're talking about battles in a cannon era. Yeah. The Japanese don't really have cannon on their ships in terms of a large volume of them. This is the really interesting thing about Korea. We'll be talking about their fleet as we get on, but Korea does, Japan doesn't. Which does lead you to the interesting idea that if the Koreans had somehow managed to reverse the invasion and conquer Japan, which, as we discussed, their political leadership, their government, and their military leadership, you will know is physically impossible for them to achieve. Frankly, the biggest threat to Korean survivability was consistently the Koreans themselves. They are a nation full of some brilliant people, and a lot of people who are trying to put those people in prison because they might outshine them in this period. They really are. Now, they also use arquebuses. A lot of them are used at sea as well. The reason why they still keep archers around is because, for anyone who knows about firing old muskets and arquebuses, you'll know that water and salt water are really not good for them. I mean, they are really not good for them. No! And so, whilst you do have that as an option, and they are powerful weapons if they're working, they're not necessarily the best weapons. Usually the Japanese are trying to go in for boarding action. They try to go in for boarding action, which honestly is also quite a lot of what the pirates try to do. And you have to remember, a lot of the pirates were also Jurchen and Qing. So, yeah. There are a lot of interesting vessels involved in these actions. You should also realize that the battles we're going to be talking about, and we're going to be talking about some fun battles, they are, for the vast majority of battles, when the Koreans are actually running them properly, they are complete walkovers because the Koreans have actually been investing in their fleet. Again, we're getting into this as we go on. But I wanted to bring you back to why haven't the Japanese been investing in it? The Japanese are a multi-island nation. Unifying them, of course, involves naval movements and logistics. But look at their unification wars and look for naval battles. Please do it now. I know, as a streamer, as a content creator, as a YouTuber, as a Twitcher, all these things, I should never do this, but I want you to do this. I even do this with students when I have them in the lecture hall. I want you to look up the Japanese unification wars, and I want you to look for naval battles on Google now. And I want you to put in the chat what you find. Go on. It's a fun thing, and I will sit here and chat away and answer some questions while I'm waiting. But please go, Google it. This is the interactive part. Go on. Go and find those battles. I'll tell you, so far looking at results, one of you is pretty much bang on. Yeah, there's one-ish. The Japanese didn't fight really at sea. They did like to use the sea for surprise movements, maneuvers, but they didn't really think in terms of standing navies. The Koreans did. They just didn't fund it. Yeah. Can't find one. Yeah, there is one-ish. Leslie was right. There is one-ish. There is one battle, which is a naval battle, where two transport fleets basically bump into each other and have a battle. It really isn't much fun. They have a few shore engagements, but yeah, it's nothing. Yeah, we're talking sieges. We're talking, yeah. It is. It is a fun piece of history. But that explains a lot about the Japanese fleet. Yeah, basically, it's well not until we get on to the later wars and the late in the 18th in the 19th century that we start to get naval battles. Realistically, as naval battles. So, shameless book plug. Thank you everyone for your support of this channel. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, helping the channel grow, all the things you do all the time that really do help the channel be as it is. As I did, a shameless book plug, and thank you for saying that you liked the book earlier. Oh, who was it? I had it in the chat. I had it highlighted so I could find it. Let's see if I can find it again. Occasionally, this works for me. McCurva Mayhem. Merkava Mayhem. Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. And it really does make me happy to see that. And more books are coming. I know they've been delayed, but oh, today I spent half the day talking to mortgage brokers, sort of to finish off the move and all these things in this house, and it's oh. By the way, if you ever feel that you are getting too confident in yourself, too hubristic, too ebullient about your virtues in life and how well you're doing, talk to a mortgage broker. It will shoot you down in seconds. I mean, it will literally crush you. So I have this. I still don't qualify for a mortgage. No. Why? In my case, apparently I need to sort out my overdraft to make sure that's paid off. Apparently my overdraft actually being used is means I can't get a mortgage at the moment. Hey, fun times. They don't mind my credit card. They don't mind that. They don't mind anything else but my overdraft. Ay, caramba. Oh, anyway. What was I going to say also? Oh, yes. There are going to be a few interesting things over the weekend. Expect to see some random videos added in. There are the videos recorded for Friday and Saturday should be uploaded later this evening, tomorrow morning. And so they'll all be scheduled in advance. I should be in the chat definitely for the Friday one. Saturday one, it's going to depend on what we're all doing because me, the two Dans from Shipshape, and Fleet of Oceans are all meeting up and doing stuff. We're hanging out all day Saturday. We're going to see Prussia Cove and a few other things in Cornwall. If anyone is in Cornwall and wants to come say hi to us in Prussia Cove, you'll be more than welcome. I will post rough times of when we're going to be there. I'm not sure where else we're going to go after Prussia Cove. We are considering St Michael's Mount, but if it is, as said, if it is really boiling sunny in Cornwall, I'm not taking them up St Michael's Mount. I don't want to kill my friends. I'd make it to the top just about, probably complaining the whole way because I'm still recovering from the damage pneumonia did to my body. I think Fleet would make it up. I'm worried about the two downs. I'm not sure down. It might well be that we spend Saturday evening eating pizza and sorting out the world, or sorting out this office space. They have been threatening they're gonna come and finally get all my books out, but unfortunately I didn't manage to get to Exeter to pick up a whole load of more bookshelves, so that's not really a viable option. We'll see. Mortgage blokes tonight, and just tonight, I think for no reason it's not your fault. No, but it is. Yeah, you will never feel good, hold on. Anyway, let's talk about the Korean ships. Now, today we've been talking, and I've basically clickbaited you in this by talking about the Gearbokuson. The Gearbokuson. And they're the turtle ships. They're this picture and the top one. This one's a reproduction, which you can see in the Saul, which is not full length. Okay? And that's its stern. This is not a full size reproduction. It's worthwhile noting that. But the far more common one were these ones. Okay? These are Panakusun. The Panakusuns are these gorgeous ships, which have commander positions, as you can see, raised up, slightly off center because of the masts, which allow the ship's commander to see where they're going. They're kind of like a raised bridge structure, accommodation structure. They also allow them to work the cannon, and what you realise is they do have cannon. Lions, you didn't rush me on Wednesday. It was perfectly fine. It wasn't you on Wednesday who caused the trouble, it was the garage. We'll leave that to one side. So yeah, these are the ships which make their fleet up. And then there is Hypersons, which are... how do I describe them? Usually, if I'm going to talk them through, if I'm going to discuss them, I will talk about them as smaller versions of the Panakusuns. Now, there is a discussion about what makes them smaller. They're definitely smaller in size, but there's a whole debate as to whether or not they have the same bridge structure. And there's a whole debate as to whether or not they have cannon. There are actual debates on these topics. Basically, we're fairly certain when it comes to the Gearbokusuns, the turtle ships, they are basically adapted Panakusun hulls. Okay? They are adapted hulls. And what you have to remember also is that usually the Korean ships have far more rounded bottoms. You might have noticed just looking at them, they're rounded bottoms. Whereas the Japanese ships tend to have more V-shaped bottoms. Now, V-shaped hulls versus rounded hulls, okay? V-shaped versus rounded. Now, there are good reasons for both this. A V-shaped hull makes you more efficient going through the water and travelling distances, but it makes turning more difficult. Okay? But it makes you more efficient at travelling more longer distances. A rounded hull makes you more manoeuvrable and better in sort of manoeuvring in coastal waters and combat. But it's not as fast over long distances, not as efficient for long distances. So again, the Japanese ships are built and orientated towards a transport function. The Korean ships are built and operated towards a warfighting function. Now, one of the interesting things about this battle, this war, and talking about the Korean Navy, is there are three admirals who are gathering fleets together. It's not just Yi Sun-sin, okay? There is also, and it's worthwhile noting that, there is also Won Gyun. Won Gyun, and a few others actually. How do I put it? There's also Bak Hong, who, well, because Busan falls and his fleet is going to be destroyed, he actually scuttles his 100 ships and weapons and stores because he doesn't want everything to get captured. Won Gyun, and also Yi Oyok-ji, Yi Oki, who was commander of the Eastern Jeolla Fleet. And, you know, there are about 4 regional fleet commanders because, again, they're counter-piracy bases, so you have local commands. Now, Bak Hong had his fleet destroyed. And then after Don-ae, Won Gyun, whose fleet was, well, he's called the Jeonyoung-sang Right Naval Commander, Won Gyun. He withdrew his ships to Hansano. But he, in a great defeat of leadership, mistook some fishing ships for the Japanese fleet, and so destroyed his weapons and stores. He was only dissuaded from deserting his command by his subordinates when he had 4 vessels remaining, when he found himself in issues. So yeah, Yi has colleagues. The value of those colleagues depends on your perspective. Yi was probably Yi Sun-sin's most trusted commander, but would be killed during the Battle of Chiliang Strait, and that was while he was trying to basically pull Won Gyun's behind out of his own head. Please note, I'm not saying head out of his own behind. I'm saying behind out of his own head, because he managed to go full way around. And that was because Won Gyun had been made naval commander of the entire Korean Navy when Yi Sun-sin was imprisoned. So they imprisoned Yi Sun-sin, put the guy who'd managed to lose his fleet to the appearance of fishing vessels, and presuming they were the Japanese fleet, in charge, and then he managed to lose a battle and get Yi Sun-sin's best deputy killed. This could only happen to the Korean Navy. It really could in this period. There were other issues. One of the big problems that you have in many of the battles and many of the scenarios is that unless you have permission from high command, i.e. the king, You are not allowed to move your region, leave your region. You're not allowed to move from it at all. So the fleets can't really assist each other. So whereas the fleets, you think, okay, the Japanese are invading, the fleets must come together, we can start organising this. No, they are waiting for orders. They will literally do nothing without orders. They don't even have charts for each other's regions. They don't even have charts. And when those fleets destroy their stores, guess what they also destroy? Their charts, which tend to be the most up-to-date and accurate charts of the region. So despite having infrastructure, despite having been investing and keeping some ships going for very sensible reasons, even with the lack of funds, despite the work of people like Yi Sun-sin, and I would even say Won Gyun and Bak Hong, who had both managed to keep their fleets at viable strengths despite the fact they burned them to ground. You lose a lot when you lose the stores. And when eventually orders do come from the capital, by the way, and this is going to lead us into our first battle, they actually order him to combine with Yi Sun-sin to combine with fleets that were no longer in existence. Okay? So the High Command has realised the fleets need to gather. It's taken so long to do it, they've actually lost the fleets while they've been deciding it. And when they send out information, they're going, yes, these fleets will gather together, they'll all form up, and then they'll crush the Japanese invaders. Those fleets don't exist anymore. And here's the fun thing. Yi Sun-sin wanted to combine with Ieoki's forces because Ieoki's forces still existed. And Yi Sun-sin knew this. But no, he was ordered to combine with Won Gyun's force. Won Gyun, who has 4 remaining ships. I mean, there's the Admiralty in World War I who are interesting, but, you know, at least they're more a case of, oh, we had a town-class cruiser there? I've forgotten all about it. Not... We have fleets there, and they don't longer exist. It wasn't that bad. There is finding out you ships you'd forgotten about, which were in a place. That's bad. But below that is giving orders to fleets which no longer exist. Pardon me for the burp there. So, here's the really annoying thing, okay? Theoretically, if they just invested in a navy, had a decent command and control, this war would never have happened. Because the fleet would have been able to position itself quickly, rapidly deploy, and basically beat up the Japanese invasion force. Because, as I've talked about, the Japanese invasion force are frigging terrible for actual naval fights. And if you can wipe out their logistics and their fleet at sea quickly enough, then that means the ground forces can be engaged at leisure. Now, whilst, yes, there's no instant comms in those days, Michael Cooch, there are no instant comms, and that's true, and these things can be held to support them. Honestly, you tend to structure orders around that. So, if you don't have instantaneous communications, you tend to go, well, you fleets combine as best you can, and tell the fleets that command and the commanders to make the decision. If you don't have instantaneous comms and you are trying to do very strict central control, you are cruising for a bruising. This is the difference. It's one of the interesting things that comes up repeatedly during the Napoleonic Wars between the Royal Navy and the French Navy. The French Navy often had very, very strict instructions of what they were supposed to do. The Royal Navy tends to operate on objectives. So your objective is to do this. Go do it. Work it out. The French one would be, you will do this, by this, by this, by this, by this. And then you will do this, and this, and this. Now, in the nicest way, the French had enough supplies and support that they could actually make that work to some extent effectively. But there are issues with doing that. The objective system is far easier to implement. But it requires you trust your subordinates. It requires you trust your subordinates. Do you see why that doesn't work in the Joseon Kingdom? You know, it's fine to have this. You have the different fleets because of counter-piracy, and that makes sense. But when you're dealing with a naval invasion, you go, fleets combine. If this person is alive, they're in charge. If they're not alive, then this person is in charge. If they're not alive, then this person is in charge. Go down your list of seniority, or you already have a seniority system worked out so they know who's in charge. And you combine. Combined fleets have council enact duties because you trust them and they are operating at a disparate enough distance of command. But if you try and do a micromanaging without instantaneous communication, micromanaging is bad enough a protocol with instantaneous communication. There's a reason why company commander in the sky and all the various distinctions we've got, and including platoon leader in the what we sometimes these days call platoon leader at the lectern, which basically is when you've got a president or prime minister or whoever leader his country, thanks to satellite communications and satellite imagery, trying to basically direct ground forces on the ground to go and do operations rather than letting the chain of command run it. It's bad enough that way. Trying to do it when you have no idea what's going on at all, not even just a bad idea of what's going on, because you're only getting a one-dimensional perspective from above, where everything looks easy and manageable and flat. That is a good way to get your fleets and your armies wiped out. Now, the thing is, and I'd like to say this politely here, that with that all being said, Yi Sun-sin and Yi Oki do manage to do a lot of working together without necessarily being instructed to. They do it creatively, based on the fact that the people above them really have no idea what is going on. This takes us to the Battle of Okpo. Now, Okpo is... What can I say about Okpo? The Japanese have 50 of their more transport ships. Not those warships, even. Just pure transport ships, pretty much. In their formation. The Koreans turn up with 43 of what they call warships, some smaller warships, and some fishing boats. There's again a debate on what size their fleet was. There is a debate as to what size their fleet was. We know that there are roughly 24 Panakasens, and 15 Hepsons, and 46 what were considered small open vessels, but were probably actually fishing boats. Okay? So why are taking fishing boats in? What use are fishing boats? Well, they are very useful for two things. One, they're very maneuverable, loaded with archers or anything else they can start causing trouble and setting fire to things. And two, what does Yi Sun-sin not want the Japanese to do? Board his ships and fight them. Those small vessels can help him keep them away. It is a bit of a trading battle, but it's also... it's a successful operation. Now, Yi sticks his flagship in the center of the line with the other heavy ships, and he sticks the light vessels on either side. He sticks one gun in the rear. One gun is good at... In fact, how do I put this? The phrases I've seen in books describing one gun's performance in this battle. Lurking, lingering... what's the other one which was pretty darn cool, I thought, and... observing... Basically, one gun is there with 4 warships. He's at the rear. He is there. He is a presence. We believe he's possibly alive, even. He might even be awake. Now, here's the fun thing about this battle. When they get there, they find that the crews of the Japanese vessels are trying to loot the village. The vessels themselves have been mostly left uncrewed. And because of the smoke around Okpo, which is a lovely little village at the time, the Japanese actually didn't notice that the Korean fleet was there until it was firing at them. So, honestly, the Japanese got taken hard from the rear, is a description which I literally read in one book and went, this book was written in the 1950s. You can write that then. I could not write that in a book these days. Now, the Japanese response, which is quite out of character for what they might claim from the history of this war, was to try and board their ships and escape. Because, believe it or not, most of the Japanese sailors realized that bumping into Korean warships was not going to be a good day for them. If you bump into a Korean warship at sea, you see the Koreans have proper warships that are designed to fight at sea. Their experience might be mostly counter-piracy, but if anyone had ever met those pirates, they'd realize they were pretty good training. You know, if you if you want some fun, look up some of the pirate fleets that operated around China and Korea and Japan in this period. Look at how big they are. They make some navies at the time look small. This is another reason why Philip II's invasion plan would fail. seriously, the pirate fleets would have wiped him out. It doesn't require the Ming Dynasty to actually the Ming Navy to actually do anything, and they really don't have the treasure fleets, and the glory of those large vessels has long since gone at this point. Um, but honestly, some of the pirate fleets would wipe out a Spanish armada. You think the English were nasty to the Spanish armada? What the Chinese pirate fleets would do to it? Drake would be a fond memory. Drake, they'd be going, oh, remember those days when we fought Drake? Oh, that was so nice. The Chinese pirate fleets. You'll run out of shot before they run out of ships. Quite literally. Oh. Anyway. So, the trouble is for the Japanese is as quickly as they board and try and get off their ships, they are encircled, ensnared, and about to be annihilated. The Japanese had arquebuses, but the Koreans had cannon. And as we all know, size really does matter in size of gun firing at you. Arquebus, not nice. You don't want to take a personal hit by that. That will cause you damage. Cannon has a habit of making a hole in your ships. And as I've said before, the way you sink ships is two methodologies that have always worked. You start a fire that can't be put out, or you make a hole which lets water in. Those two things are what will happen. Yeah, there is seriously an argument that if you had turtle ships to fight the Spanish Armada would have been annihilated. And the Ming would have called on the Koreans. They would have called on the Koreans to provide the heavy ships, and the Koreans would have come because the Ming provide ships later on in the war to protect Korea from the Japanese and troops. Now, Yi Sun-sin was really annoyed by what the Japanese had done. And the Japanese did their best to fight back. But they are being annihilated. So eventually they start to throw their weapons and armor overboard because they don't want the Koreans getting their weapons. They don't want to go into the water with their armor and start to jump into the water. 26 of their transports are destroyed by the bombardment alone. Now, this is where Yi Sun-sin really demonstrates the difference between strategic leadership and emotional leadership. Considering his upset and with what had happened, you would be understandable if he had ordered his men to go ashore and pursue the Japanese onto the island. But he knew abandoning his ships, leaving them and the fleet vulnerable and undercrewed, would be a very problematic thing if the Japanese then attacked him. However, Won Gyun was not minimized by this because how to put the point? When some Yi Sun-sin's men actually seize a Japanese ship, Won Gyun's only contribution to this battle is to order his 4 ships to fire on them by mistake. That is the man who they put in charge of the Navy when they decide to lock up Yi Sun-sin for the sin of being capable. The man whose sole contribution to this first battle of the war was to fire on a ship which had been captured by mistake. Can I just say something? There are some commanders in history who honestly deserve to go on a wall, for these men survived having incompetent subordinates and did not kill them all. Rozensky would be up there. Yi Sun-sin would be up there. Jellicoe would be up there. There are a few others who will be up there. Yi managed to burn the rest of the Japanese ships which had been banned in Happo Harbor. And, as said, the next battle is the Battle of Happo. Now, this was a battle which takes place after the Battle of Okpo. And pretty much they find 5 ships trying to sail away. They pursue them, they capture them, and destroy them in Happo. And these first 2 victories, the first one is them capturing the sea, really allows him to tell his forces, look, we can win here. We can win here. Please note again, Won Gyun's ships managed to not quite get lost, but they are definitely at the back. Won Gyun's captains are honestly are honestly considering doing nasty things to him at this point because they want the transfer. He is managing to prove not very popular. Not very popular at all. And Happo was a battle which needed to be fought. But then more Japanese supply ships start to come in. And this is the Battle of Gyokinjipo. And by the way, this is Samuel Hawley's Imjin War. Now, as I've said before, I wanted to say there's a book which is worthwhile reading. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it is worthwhile reading. It's fun. But, and I mean this in the nicest way, none of these books, none of them, there just isn't enough extra literature around them for you to have a fully rounded picture. It's not enough for me to go read all these books. So as good as this one is, it's one person's history of this, one person's perspective after reading all the information. So yeah, it's a starting point. It's worthwhile reading though, but it is a starting point. Now, the Battle of Gyokinjinpo, Gyojinpo, was, as I said, there are more transports coming in. And ideally, this is what a Navy can be used for in this scenario. They are limiting the ability of the Japanese to resupply. Now, I would say Kyongjang, we are very lucky we have the original sources. But I would also say, how do I put this? The original sources, the original sources are also products of their time. And as I've talked about before, and talked about a lot recently, original sources, is that you have to remember that a personal account of a battle is just that, a personal account. It can be full of, it can have some biases in it, can have some issues in. I recently did a video about Admiral Yi, which I'm going to reference in, because I brought in quite a lot of his personal account of Battle of Jutland to talk about his thought process, because he does give quite a contemporaneous account. And as I've said, there is a scenario where he's describing it as taking place a lot earlier in the battle, but which only really fits the actions of HMS Warspite. So he's either got the timing wrong, or he's not talking about. He's talking about something which didn't happen in his personal account. Now, I would say he's probably got the timing wrong when he's remembering it and writing it back afterwards, and that happens. But this is one of the things again when there are good personal accounts, there are good sources, but again, you have to put them in together. And this is where good accounts written by historians really do come in. Because usually with a historian's account, what they do is they offer you the context. And they offer you these are the synthesized views of all these different sources put together. And the timeline as best we can make it out. But still, they are battles which are worthwhile studying. They are completely different admirals, Stakar. You keep asking these questions of comparing Yi and Nelson. If you want a long-range fluid warfare, you probably want Nelson. If you want someone who's going to build up infrastructure and build up a fleet to dominate a region, dominate an area, you're probably talking about Admiral Yi. But they're completely different metrics. It's, again, one of the things. There is a reason I avoid doing videos which are top 10s and this sort of scenario, because I would have to compare people who are completely different once you read their context and you can read their actual details of them and you go into them. So, yeah. They're both brave. They're both great at their jobs in different ways. But Yi has his weaknesses, and so does Nelson. As I've said before, if you want to run a navy in peacetime, you want Collingwood. You don't want Nelson. If you're talking about the model navy basing themselves on, it's far better for them to pick Collingwood to learn from than Nelson. As good as Nelson is, as useful as Nelson is, Collingwood's actually better for the modern navy. Any of you? Okay, I'm not sure why you're going British naval history, but let me explain something, because you keep bringing about my PhD. My PhD was on development of naval aviation. It only ended up being on the Royal Navy rather than the US Navy and the Japanese Navy as well, because I got so much that I'd actually exceeded the word count. So I had to take out the sections on the Japanese and the American navies. I did my PhD in war studies from King's College London, and I taught, while I was there, naval history from the ancient Greeks up to the invasion of Afghanistan, and literally taught naval warfare the whole period. I have taught naval warfare, international relations, conflict management, risk tolerance, all that in terms of naval warfare and naval operations, and occasionally aspects of the history side of maritime law, because maritime law is mostly set in precedents, not in treaty, etc. Basically the gamut, because there aren't that many naval historians. That sounds terrible in EU, but basically there aren't that many naval historians, so it's a far smaller profession than other parts of history in terms of the number of people who do it. So we tend to have to be far more generalist. and be able to teach and go and study it all. So I have to. This is one of the reasons why I have so many books, because I can't be an expert in everything, but I teach quite a lot of it. So I have to make sure I go and read the books by the experts in it to teach it. So some things I will claim that, I have gone and studied the primary sources in. And I will often try and read the primary sources on topics which I'm going to be teaching. But I will go and read the books by the people who are the experts and who've been studying on it, all the books which are contained in any autobiographies and those things as well, so I will learn it. So I have to be a generalist. So this is why I do the things I do, and also why I do YouTube naval history, because I want to inspire next generation naval historians and inspire people to go and study naval history. Because it's like if you... A good example I often use is go, look at TV programs about naval historians. And they use naval historians. Look at how often it's the same faces that show up. That's because there's really not a lot of us to pick from. Oh, Patrick, I've done stuff on Chatham. It was an absolute. I don't use the word on this channel because I used to describe it, but let's put it this way: the word comes from the phrase I usually describe for it if I'm not teaching on this channel or not talking on this channel would come from a movie called Heartbreak Ridge, and is used a lot by a guy called Gunny Highway, which is a Clint Eastwood character, and that basically describes Chatham. Yeah, I taught Kalauschwitz. But the thing is, you can't teach Mahan and Corbett without teaching Clausewitz, because if you don't understand where the policy of suddenly writing down these ideas of how to wage war come from, then you're lost. And you have to go back, and you actually have to go back to... Realistically, the first one who really tries to do it and gets successful with it is Machiavelli. And so you have to start off with Machiavelli and work your way through. Yes, and that pretty much sums it up, but I won't say it because the army historians might be upset with me. But there are a lot more of them. Basically, if you go into the King's War Studies department, you'll find there's like 5 naval historians in the entire department, in the War Studies department, and there's like... That's a department of about 250 historians. There's like 5 in naval history. And that's one of the biggest, best departments in the world. Oh. I wouldn't say necessarily they are. I'd say they're definitely a contender for the greatest, but the fact is there are so much rich naval history. But we'll carry on this channel. But I will open up to general questions once we get to the end. How's that sound? I'll open up to general questions once we get to the end. Now, this battle and these battles, there's a reason I'm talking about these battles as they're coming on, because they lead into the Battle of Sacheon. And there's a reason why that's quite cool, because this is the battle. This is the battle where we first at a time we ever get these vessels being used. The first time we get the turtle ship, or as I'm trying to call it, so we all sort of know it, so as again, this is kind of like me in the Schnell boat rather than the E-boat, the Gearbussen. Again, go back to that, so I make sure I'm good on through. The Gearbussen. That's a good vessel. Now, this battle is... oh, God. This battle is what we would call clearing up some messes. Clearing up a lot of messes, this battle is about. You might notice most of these fights are taking place in the parts of Korea which are closest to Japan. These are on their supply routes. This is them trying to interdict supplies and logistics, and trying to stop it all. Or at least break it up enough they can actually do what they need to do. Now, this is taking place about 3 weeks after the Battle of Okpo. At this point, because of damages received in fleets, deployments, etc., Yi Sun-sin and Won Gyun have roughly 26 ships left under their command viable. 23 of those are Admiral Yi's. 23. At this point, Won Gyun gets sent some information that the Japanese are in Sacheon. Now, this battle is interesting because Yi Sun-sin leaves behind the fishing vessels he's been using very well at this point to bring the newly completed turtle ship with him. He only has one in this battle. One. Korea height advantage? No, they're roughly about the same. But the Japanese vessels have some height advantages in certain points and are certainly considered better for boarding, which is one of the reasons why you have the armoured roof as well. Now, the other reason he leaves the fishing vessels behind, I think, is because he plans on doing some nasty manoeuvres. He's planning on doing some very nasty manoeuvres. See, this fleet is mostly his fleet, which he's been training for a little over a year. He's got them quite drilled. They can do some very nasty, inventive things. Because as we've been over before, Yi Sun-sin is a thinker. He's an analyst, and he's a thinker. He likes to learn stuff. He likes to think about how he do stuff. He likes to practice it. And he likes to refine it. In other words, he's the one person in a battle you don't give time. You take him out quickly, because if you give him time, he's going to work out how to beat you. Now, the Japanese, when they arrive, are in a harbour. But as said, he has a plan. And, oh, this is a lovely plan. And this is the last battle we're looking at in this piece before I do a bit of a summary and then I'll go open up for questions. Now, when they get to Sacheon, Yi manages to go ashore. He manages to quietly get ashore and get a look around. He does some land reconnaissance himself. He finds there's a cliff overlooking the city, and that the Japanese soldiers were complete dominion over the city. They have complete dominion. There were actual Japanese warships in this harbour. 12 of them. Possibly 13. Very large, very capable ships. Because of the cliffs, because of the various positions, he knew that any direct attack on the Japanese fleet in harbour would draw massive amounts of arquebus fire and could probably destroy his formation. Now, his plan was to do what's necessary. To draw the Japanese out to the sea, where there was room to maneuver. If he could get the Japanese fleet out to sea to follow him, and he could maneuver around them, he knew he had the advantage. Remember again, V-shaped hulls versus rounded hulls. Hulls designed for long distance strategic transportation versus hulls designed for combat maneuvering inshore. Working out the difference here, playing to his advantages, all very sensible. And to do this, he uses, and I'm going to make sure I point out, not the turtle ship. He doesn't show the turtle ship. He uses the Panakusons, the large fighting ships. He's using them as the lure. He's using them as the lure. And it works. Now, he had the turtle ship built by this point, and it's worthwhile considering that having it built and having it designed, the first ones had been probably built between 1413 and 1450, and they had fallen out of use. It wasn't a new design. It was something he'd read about. In other words, they'd first had this idea of these sort of ships with protected coverings being used to fight the Japanese a little over 170, 180 years earlier. Okay? But the thing is, Yi Sun-sin knew of them. And so, he designs them. And they have roofing. There's a whole debate still over whether the armor, they were covered in metal plates or metal spikes on thick wood, on a thick piece of wood. That is, whether the ship was actually a true ironclad or whether it was thick wood and specially treated wood. There's a whole debate over about that. But the trouble is, it comes from the sources, which describe it occasionally as being covered in iron, but it could also mean that they are iron plate or they're iron spikes. We mostly tend to point to Japanese sources, which are slightly better at remembering this because someone kept deciding to destroy the records of the Korean infrastructure. For some reason, usually it's the different political parties, depending on who's actually dominant, wanting to make themselves have control of history, because those who control history can control the narrative, and those who control the narrative can control the future. It's a brilliant idea. It does work. Be careful of it. So you have some historians have pointed out that the Japanese actually start trying to use iron plate in the building of ships from 1593 onwards in response to these Korean vessels. But that could be a response to the Koreans using cannon, not necessarily to them having armor. Oh. But it's a whole debate. The thing is, they were armed with some large cannon. Often we refer to them as shongtongs. But they have various types of cannon, and the fact is they have spent a lot of time, money and effort building them. That is something to remember. I would also say there's probably a difference between some of the ornate ones remembered in books and stories, as in pictures drawn, versus the ones which are built. I'm fairly sure the ones which were being built quickly for battle were probably less ornate than the ones which were built and maintained afterwards, or maybe as remembered. Especially as Yi Sun-sin basically wanted them in service quickly. Anyway, the Battle of Sacheon. Now, what they do is they go in to attack the Japanese in the dark. Well, it was very nearly dark. It's darker. It's the time of night. Dusk and dawn are when it's hardest for your eyes to adjust to seeing the long distance and making out shapes, because the light's not quite right. It's neither dark nor light, and it makes all sorts of weird things. So we're often least trustful of our eyesight at dusk and dawn, in that sort of hazy bit. And so what he does is he heads towards Sacheon, and then he turns around and looks like he's trying to withdraw. And this is where it turns out that the commander of the Japanese fleet, who'd been there at the time, had been watching it. Had been seeing what they were doing. Now, there is a whole debate as to whether all the Japanese ships in this were atakebun or were large sekibuns. They were probably mostly a mixture of the two, because atakebun are very, very rare. They are very rare, but there was quite probably some of them there. Quite probably some of them there. Now, I would point out that the Japanese stories of it and history regarding it basically say that the Japanese tried to the Joseon Navy tried to charge in, were forced away with arrows, and so they couldn't maneuver. So they were ordered to withdraw by Yi's son, and then the Japanese bravely stormed after them. And that's probably not quite correct, because it seems that whilst its son, Yi's son, did get closer than he was aiming to, he was planning on turning around. That does seem to be the plan he told everyone. Because, interesting enough, Won-gyun doesn't panic and run away. So I'm fairly sure if the retreat hadn't been planned formally in advance, Won-gyun would have panicked and run away. I'm sorry, I'm going to say that. The guy has already managed to burn a fleet because of fishing ships. I'm not trustful of him not running away if a retreat had been ordered, even if it was planned to be a fake, by Yi Sun-sin without telling, if he hadn't been told in advance. And once they've pulled the Japanese fleet out after them, and sufficiently far enough, well, they turn around. And they engage them with cannonballs and fire arrows. Unsurprisingly, the Japanese fleet start to take heavy damage. They don't really have much to fight against this. The Japanese soldiers, though, and remember, these ships are warships. They're armed with sailors. They have proper soldiers. They're not a transport supply fleet, as they found at Okpo. Try to return fire, but the cannonball fire of the Koreans is just overwhelming. And the turtle ship, of course, is impossible to board because of its covering. And so the Japanese try to board it, but it's leading them into that. It's leading the Korean fleet through them. Now, interestingly enough, very nearly we have a big problem, because an arquebuser of the Japanese managed to actually hit Admiral Yi. It punctured the skin of his left arm, but he was given a minor injury. But we very nearly had a Nelson at Trafalgar scenario. Yeah, look back at Wongun. It was actually a Korean fishing ships returning. He thought they were an enemy fleet coming in, and so yeah. It took place over roughly 2-3 hours, but the Japanese warships that fought were all destroyed. And their survivors tried to get ashore. But at this point, the major thing this causes is the Japanese start to realize their supply routes are definitely not secure and they might be in danger. And also, at this point, well, Yi goes, woohoo! Turtle ship project proved! Let's build a lot more of these. Let's build a lot more of these. And that works. That works indeed. So, what do we get from this battle? What do we get from all these battles of leadership? Yi Sun-sin basically works for most of these operations with the small cadre force which he has built up himself. Yes, he has another admiral with him. Yes, that admiral is mildly annoying. Yes, he can ignore him. Yeah, that admiral is not necessarily a bad admiral. He's just not the strongest character in the book. Now, I would say, with all these battles, and this whole discussion of why talk about them in May, is because these are the battles which lead up to the turtle ship coming in. And realistically, it's all coming in. One of the things you notice very quickly is that the High Command do not order these ships made. If Yi Sun-sin hadn't been in charge for a year, hadn't built the infrastructure to the point at which they could be built, and hadn't been studying those books to know them, to be able to build them, because remember, we're talking ships, and it's worthwhile thinking about it. Yi Sun-sin was born in 1545. When he is born, these ships haven't existed for possibly 100 years, if not longer. These ships have ceased to be there. So, the one thing you can tell about him is he certainly learns from history. He goes and studies things. He listens to the people who are telling him things. And being able to rebuild these ships, again, think about it. The question I'd like to ask to people often is, how quickly do you think this ship is built? Because I've had a discussion with certain people who honestly believe that it is built between the time from the Battle of Okpo to the Battle of Sacheon, which is roughly 3 weeks. Now, I don't think a ship of that size, even though it's made of wood, even with the infrastructure and the stuff they have behind them, and all the cannon and everything else for it, and the armor plate, could be constructed within 3 weeks, unless it had already been planned. So, my view is this. The turtle ships are something Yi had already been working on. He might not have actually built the ships, but the materials for them had definitely been put aside already earlier in his command. He had prepared for them. He was in charge for a year. I'd also like to point out that all the other regional fleets have theoretically similar capabilities of infrastructure and potentials to construct them, yet it's his fleet which is doing it. The guy who'd already been in prison because of generals being upset with him. He prepared for it. He prepared his fleet. He prepared his force. He'd done what he could. Well, Kyung-jun, yes, Jang, yeah, it is. It is different from the Panakan. I would say, to my mind, it looks like it's a Panakan with probably a different structure, not the same command structure above it. It's basically been shrunk down, and it's got a covered deck. There are lots of extra materials you need. But even those Panakan are probably under construction for quite a while. It's not 2 years. He's only in command of the fleet for a year before war breaks out. He's only been put in post for a year. So I think it's probably about 6 months he's been repairing the resources. And I would say my strong suspicion is he has some Panakan on the construction which are rapidly converted to turtle ships. So he has the hulls already built. It's just that they are designed to be rapidly converted. That is my theory. And that makes a lot more sense than saying it was built in 3 weeks. However, I wouldn't be surprised if, as far as central government knew, it was built in 3 weeks. Because can you all imagine the reaction of the court, the Joseon court, if they knew Yi Sun-sin was bringing back this ship from 150-ish years ago without permission? The only way he's going to get it done is without permission. Let's be honest, they're never going to agree to it because they're all going to debate over whose idea it is and who gets the credit for it. But, yeah. My theory, based on the study, and I have to admit, this is not necessarily from the books involved, although some of the historians are certainly very interesting and circumspect about this. And I would say this is the English language historians. I do admit I cannot read Korean. I am working on being able to read Japanese. I have been working on that for years. I can read German. I can read French. I'm not necessarily good at pronouncing, but I can read them. I can read the technical documents in pretty much any language if they're engineering documents. But which apparently being able to read engineering is a whole different language skill, according to most of my colleagues and as a historian. But I would say that from the books I have read and the works I have read, the reason we don't know how long they take to construct is because Yi Sun-sin and those close to him who were trying to protect him from the Central Court have made it very difficult to find it out. There is a lot of constructive obfuscation going on. A lot of constructive obfuscation. And again, it's nothing we haven't seen before on this channel when I've talked about naval history. You know, I would say I would say it's right out most naval officers who are ever put in charge of construction programs policies. Fisher, HMS Dreadnought is just another. We're going to keep it as close in many ways to a pre-Dreadnought, so people don't realise what we're building. That's why it's got the same guns, it's got the same things, so they don't realise what we're ordering until it's too late, until it's rapidly built, so we can steal the march and everyone. Henderson and the honestly not an aircraft carrier HMS Unicorn. Which, by the way, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, look up HMS Unicorn. Remember, that is a forward aviation ship, a support ship, not an aircraft carrier. We're talking about the World War II one. And the Americans have similar interesting bits in their history, although they often have more difficulty with Congress. Yeah. And that's just some of the more famous ones. Once you start going into some of the smaller navies around the world, there is a whole saga which someday I will tell if I'm able to. Because there are bits which are definitely not public to do with the whole Stanflex system and the Danish Navy. And that is a whole... how that was got through and how that was put up is... oh, that's some interesting fun. Yeah, but you have to remember, different navy... in the Royal Navy... look, it's kind of like the Korean system inverts the whole patronage system which the Royal Navy's built on, which is kind of makes it an interesting thing to study. Because the whole Royal Navy thing is as a patronage, is you want people who are your following to be as successful as they possibly can, because that makes you look good and helps build you up for promotion. Whereas the Korean system seems more if you want people who are following you to be as unsuccessful about you as possible, because if they're successful, they're a threat to you. Yes, there's a good little discussion going on great refits and refits. Yes, going on in the chat. Ah, it's a fun time. Sounds like modern UK management. Life is fun. By the way, again, because apparently I have to do this occasionally in so many videos, this is called Iron Brew. It's a soft drink. It's not an alcoholic drink, because that occasionally comes up, and I occasionally get comments still, and I'm going, okay, it's Iron Brew. In the UK, it's a Scottish-based equivalent of cola or Coca-Cola in some ways. Hello, you want a hug? Okay, you have been here for a while. Do you think you deserve a biscuit? No. Is that it? Oh, you deserve bickies. Well, you have been very good, and you haven't had many. You have been good, and you are gorgeous. So you probably do deserve biscuits. So I will... while I am... don't ruin the immersion, sir. Right. There we go. Now, what am I going to do next? Well, I'm going to open questions, but I'm going to try and turn on the bot to do it. For those who, again, do not know, I have a question bot for this channel, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. When it does work, great. When it doesn't work, we find other ways. Please tell me Raleigh doesn't also drink Iron Brew. He occasionally tries. He occasionally tries. So, the bot should be on. And I will open up the Discord server so I can see if any questions start to appear now. Yeah. I don't know why. People find it very hard to believe that I do all this sober and I'm a non-drinker. I don't drink alcohol, but I don't. As again, I've discussed this before. And after this, I will put Raleigh to bed, and then I'll be in Discord as well in the chatting away with people if anyone has further questions even after we finished here. Always happy to chat away on the Discord server on the Thursday. Yep. Right then. We have had a Shemus book club. Okay. Let me see if the questions are coming in. Yes, the questions are coming in. From YouTube. I do not know how this works sometimes. Okay. Let's see. Why do you think the Japanese did not create a navy before the 1800s? Honestly, I'm not. Can people atting me doesn't help with the whole the bot's working. So normal bot commands, please. For those who don't know, I/Q&A will come up, and that will show that's usually the easiest one. So okay. So have we had a shameless book plug? Yes, we have today. We have had that. Kyung Jung, what was the quality of Korean versus British cannon this time? British cannon was slightly faster firing, but I think the Korean cannon was altogether more accurate. From what I can tell from accounts. But the trouble is they never really compared directly alongside each other, so it's literally piecing together from accounts and working it out. But I would... And that's the interesting thing, is sometimes when you look at the different carriages and different systems they have designed for them. Now, why do you think the Japanese did not create a navy before the 1800s? Before the basically 19th century? Give me a second. I think Poodle wants to go garden. I do apologise, but I've got the questions, and please keep putting questions in, and I'll get to them. Can Poodle go garden? Yes. I can see where your river is. Be very quick. Sorry, it's rare he actually goes to the door and cries, so I decided he was pretty desperate. I will be back in a second, but just keys, put in the questions, and I will get them. And there will be notes in... This works for both Twitch and YouTube. Notes will come up saying questions received, and that will be restored in the system, and so I will definitely get to them. Yes, yes, I'll come give you biscuits. How is it you demand biscuits for everything? It's your payment for being a good boy, right? You are a good boy. You're a gorgeous fluffy dog. Yes, you are. Let's see. There we go. And yeah, the bot is working, seems to be working perfectly. Just so slow, isn't it? Poor Runon is currently probably screaming at the bot. Why? But yes, why do I think the Japanese did not create a navy before the 1800s? Before the 19th century? Realistically, it's need, and it's because, to an extent, the lords, the lords and the system that sort of governs Japan, especially the daimyo, don't want there to be a centralized navy, And what do they really need a navy for other than transportation? Because the important things are shore, right? The important things are the islands themselves, not the water around them. So that's the differential. I I do sometimes wonder if they'd had a different war against the Mongol forces and the engagement of them, if they'd had to use naval forces for that, if they might have changed their opinions. But they didn't have that history. They had, of course, the Divine Wind scenario, which and a few battles, which were mostly shore battles, which changed that. You Minecraft watcher, what historical ship would you own if you could, even historically sank or was scrapped? You've picked HMS Renown, and normally, and as often I'd pick HMS Renown, as she's my favourite of the World War II battlecruisers by a long range. There's a few aircraft carriers I like from a historical perspective. There's HMS Tiger, was probably one of the prettiest ships of the Royal Navy. But honestly, it's probably HMS Nubian because of all the things she does as a Triber class destroyer for the Royal Navy, and the fact that she wasn't preserved really annoys me because she almost has more battle. If battle honors were awarded to destroyers the same way they are to battleships, she would have more battle honors than Warspite. And yeah, please try to keep the questions more they can be generalish, but more focused on tonight's video. And there's Brew Ships on Sunday where I answer pretty much any naval history topic, and if I don't know the answer, I will try and look it up. But I always have the policy of, if I have an answer I can give, and I know, I will give it. If I don't have an answer, I'll go away and look it up and try and give an answer. Yeah. Dr. Ram, yes, a lot of our naval history heritage was thoughtlessly scrapped. And it's atrocious when you consider how many battleships Britain built and the fact that none of them survive. Oh, I'm hoping to do a trip with the Shipshape crew, which is myself, Drakenfell, and a few others of who are naval history inclined, to Japan later this year. And we're going to see Mikasa, which is the youngest surviving British-built battleship. And we also, last year, we went into Scandinavia, and we were in Tallinn. And that's where the only surviving British submarine from the 1930s is. It's just, yeah, it's fun. Tema 2, can you name any commanders of the Korean turtle ships? Honestly, no. And honestly, I've been trying for years to try and get a decent list of them. But we don't really seem to have... That hasn't either made it to the English history scenario or hasn't made it properly into... There are discussions. I think my suspicion is that Yi Sun-sin's nephew was one of them because of how many times he turns over battles. But there are various other officers who might have been in charge of them but might not have been. Yeah. It's a discussion point. How many more battles does he lead after these? Oh, he does quite a few. After these battles comes the Battle of Dangpo, Battle of Dang Hangpo, Battle of Hanson Island, Battle of Anglopo, Battle of Busan, Battle of Mianang, and the Battle of Nuryang where he dies. So there's another 7 battles. And by the way, please note, he does have, I think, 3 wives. Lady Bang, Lady O, and Lady Burak. And he has 3 legitimate sons and 1 daughter, and 2 illegitimate sons and 2 illegitimate daughters, theoretically. And we say that theoretically because, honestly, he seems quite prolific. Quite prolific. Were turtle ships really ironclads in 1550? It depends on your perspective on them. Now, the thing is, they have iron plate on them. Now, does that make them ironclad? Theoretically, in the loosest definition of the term, it does. If they have iron plate on them. But there is the other point of, were they just covered in iron spikes? We're not really sure. The iron plate would certainly make them very difficult to penetrate, and they do seem to be made of have thick wooden hulls and thick wooden structure. But then they seem to have a lot of iron in their structure. But do they have iron plate? Honestly, we don't really have enough information to be sure. We don't. That is a debate. That is a debate. They could have been. They could have been. Nicholson, may I ask what your doctoral research focused on? Development of naval aviation in the 1920s and 30s. How it developed differently in Britain, America, and Japan was the original starting point of my thesis. My actual thesis, when it was finally put in, was because it had to be 100,000 words, was on just development in the UK. I had to strip out about another 100,000 words I wrote, because I wrote too much, and then I went to my supervisor and went, who's Professor Andrew Lambert, and went, this is too much. And he went, yeah. And I went, what do I cut out? He said, well, the British one is about enough. That's about 100,000 words succinctly, including the appendices. The Japanese and American stuff, that basically adds on too much. And so I then altered it and edited and added a bit of the Japanese and American stuff into the final thesis, but it's not as much. They become points of comparison rather than points of other discussion. Malaga, how strong would you say the turtle ships were compared to contemporary European warships? They would have wrecked the Spanish fleet. They would have wrecked the Spanish galleons. The English, the frigate-built ships are pretty darn maneuverable, but they're not designed for boarding. So it's going to depend where the battle takes place. If the battle takes place inshore, in the littorals, I think it goes to the turtle ships, which have ability to have oar power. If it takes place anywhere further out to sea, where it's entirely wind dependent, then the British ships probably have an advantage. But they're both going to be blowing at each other with cannon, which really aren't designed to beat each other at the ranges they're probably engaging. So yeah. It'll be fun. Steve Clarke, do any of the armor plates survive, and have they been tested for harness? That answers your question. That sort of answered by the earlier answer of the question of, do we know what they were in terms of ironclads? Senator, after a question in chat, was the Royal Army and the Royal Navy from founding to now the greatest navy that ever existed in history? See, as British, I would like to say yes, but I would say it has certainly at points been the largest and best navy in the world, and certainly what I often describe navies as is that at certain points they are the benchmark navy. For a long period, the Royal Navy was the benchmark navy. Now it's the U.S. Navy is the benchmark navy. Think about it. Whenever we talk about ships today, we compare them to the American equivalents. We say, are they more powerful, are they less powerful than their American equivalents? For a long time, the Royal Navy was the benchmark navy. For a while, though, the French Navy was the benchmark navy. For a while, the Spanish were the benchmark navy. There have been multiple benchmark navies through history. And I always feel that's a far better phrase to look for than the greatest navy, because greatest is such a subjective phraseology, and it's by what reference. But benchmark navy does really signify their importance. They are the navy which everyone is comparing themselves to of that period. Yeah. When you say the human eyes can't make out shape well at dawn and dusk, would that be worse with sunlight directly ahead? Yes, it would be. It's very bad. Basically, when the light is fuzzy, when you get it at dusk and dawn, there's a few minutes, either way, half an hour at dusk and dawn, when it's harder to scan the horizon because the light is fuzzy. So your eyes don't know whether to go into night mode or be in day mode. That's when you have problems, because they have. Let's be honest, that's not a very long period of the day. Your eyes have to be good at helping you at night, and they have to be good at helping you in the day. That's what they had to be for. That fuzzy bit in between, that's designing everything around that and your optical nerves around adapting to that is, from a biological point of view and a survival point of view, a unnecessary scenario. You can take other things to even out that issue, that situation. Senator, are European canon and the Korean canon in any way related? Look, I know we like to have this idea that everyone's completely independent development, but the ideas were going backwards and forwards along the Silk Road and around the various trading points for a long time. So, in my mind, there probably is some ideas going backwards and forwards, but there's differences in terms of the infrastructure, industry, and the approach to how they're constructed, based on their own strength, their own local culture, their own local technological development, and their own local capabilities. So I would say in terms of ideas and some of the developments around them, they are related. But in terms of some of the ability, some terms of their actual construction, they are different. Do we have any idea how many cannon turretship would have had? Now, there are rough guesses around this, but most of them come from pictures, okay? And the idea is that roughly they could have had 24, 12 each side. But they might have had slightly more, they might have had slightly less. We're not really sure. They are done from, like the top picture here above my finger, they're done from pictures of that and basically adding up the gaps for cannon. Okay? So the idea is they could have up to 24, but we don't really know. And some of those holes might not be for cannon, they might be for other things. So they could have a lot less. But 24 is often put together as a running theory. But please don't hold me to that, because honestly, that is based on what people have roughly said and the rough analysis I've done of pictures myself and looking into descriptions of them. But there are scholars who are debating, and there is one I saw the other day who was claiming they had 60, and I was just going, I think you're completely and utterly talking up the wrong tree. That's a very different ship you're talking about. No worries, Nicholasing. Nikhil, I was happy to answer your question earlier, and I would say that question you've asked will be a very good one for brew ships on Sunday. For those who don't know, again, I do a Q&A session, and I should actually put the questions live, up, questions open, because on Sunday, where I do a whole general naval history discussion, and I will answer all these questions happily. That I do that every Sunday because people always have questions, and I love to answer questions. It's fun. It's fun for me to stretch myself and enjoy myself like that. Honestly, considering the way Yi often tries to expose himself in fights to see what's going on and try to figure out what's going on, he would be a very obvious target as a person poking their head about, trying to stare around, trying to look out for things. And so, no, it's not necessarily bad luck, but also the engagement ranges we're talking about. There are engagement ranges which would actually shorter range than Nelson, and was probably engaging at. So, yeah, these things happen. They are good targets. You are aiming for them. But again, there's also the fact that you're just generally firing in the direction, and if you're exposed, you run the same risk as anyone of getting hit. Which British Third Sea Lord would you compare Yi to? Possibly Fisher in the role as Third Sea Lord is closest to him. Of the ones which people would recognise by name. There are a few other potentials, but Fisher is probably it. Hi, KVG. Now, if you want to look up the cannon, and I will say this, it's worthwhile looking up the turtle ship and looking up their cannon construction, because their Korean cannon quite rightly deserve their own, and very good, their own discussion. Now, the Koreans started having gunpowder from about 1356. Roughly 1356. And when it comes to cannon, there is a whole debate as to what they're necessarily made out of, but it does seem to me, when I look at them, that I'm looking at things which are, broadly speaking, iron. And they do look like iron cannon to me. Far more than brass cannon. But, yeah, there is a whole discussion over it. They certainly fired shot made of stone or iron or sometimes arrows or large wooden darts with fins, which were considered more accurate. So, you know, they had a lot of interesting stuff when it came to cannon. Why these ships of the types of ships weren't discovered in Europe? Mostly because the European naval warfare was different. European naval warfare was often warfare of maneuver and engagement, and because of that, you couldn't necessarily. How do I put this politely? You didn't have the kind of actions if you built these ships in a European circumstances, as said, the maneuverability of the Royal Navy's frigate, of the frigates built ships, etc., would have caused them issue. They'd have probably still won in a mauling fight, but they would have caused them problems, and as time would have gone on, that would have worn against them because of the strategic mobility. And that's one of the issues you have to deal with. You also have to deal with the fact that the European navies were also thinking about maneuvering further often. These are very good ships if you're fighting short-range fights and you're mainly keeping to within certain waters around Korea. You're not really going far out for long voyages because they don't have deep V hulls, which make them better for ocean going. And so that's the problem. It's balancing the performance you need for your operations. And that's also probably the other thing, the general joy of the North Sea and the North Atlantic as a thing to operate in versus the East China Sea and that particular area. KVG, What do we know of the Korean iron steel industry on the period, and were they using iron, brass, or other kind? I answered that one. The iron steel industry of Korea seems to be quite advanced. The iron industry, but again, it's one of those things which is a mixed bag. It depends on where we're talking about. There's a lot of theoretical discussion, a lot of good development done, but again, under this particular king, what can I say? He wasn't that particularly good. And I'm going to carry on questions for another 15 minutes. So I might close the questions soon. It's going to depend on... I will release all the ones in the queue to work out how many I have left. I have a couple left. So I'll keep the sign up. But I'll do about another 15 minutes of questions. And then I'll move to Discord after putting someone to bed. Hayes Gray, meekly ducking Runon's rolled up newspaper. Who's making my senior admins upset? What sources did I use for this research? Well, I highlighted one, which is somewhere along here. It's this way, does it? Yeah. Could you stop licking my hand? I'm trying to click the mouse. Thank you. Are you annoyed that you're covered up? The Imaging War by Samuel Hawley. I also used a lot of my notes, and which is terrible to say, but I literally used my notes from when I taught this stuff. A long time ago. So I have no idea. It would certainly have been some of the Ming books of this series, because they have quite good histories, and I have some other histories of Korea which I used at the time as well. So basically, I'm sorry for this particular presentation. I went back to my old notes, and I didn't necessarily go to the other original sources. I just went to my old notes, which I made from those sources. But they're still good. And those books are worthwhile getting. And hello, poodle, being poodle. Oh, okay, out we come. Oh, fluffy beasts. All right. Yes, what was the Chinese response to these ships? Honestly, they were allied with Korea, and also they shared a land border with them, and they had no fear of the Korean army, so they didn't really bother about them. Their theory was that if they needed to, they'd just invade Korea. And the army would probably fall apart. Yeah. That's their basic, seems to be their basic analysis of the situation. The Chinese themselves couldn't often understand the Korean court's treatment of their senior officers who were so successful. They really couldn't understand it, and at various points the Chinese personnel actually, and the Chinese government actually treats Yi Sun-sin better than the Korean one. That's quite common actually for them. And let's be honest, the Chinese court has its own issues. Hello, I think you're being collected.
Pork pie?
Yes, he would like pork pie.
Can you add potatoes to your list?
I will add potatoes to my list of things I'm supposed to get from Aldi. Let me just note this down before I forget it. Sorry, everyone. I'm doing the shopping tomorrow. I have to go to Aldi. There's a pen. Oh, I have a pen. Potatoes. Done. Right. Speaking of firing large darts, this is from De Brock. Would something resembling a modern fin-stabilized discarding saber round have been possible or useful in the Age of Sail? Actually, that's one of the things the Koreans were trying out. So they were trying that. They found them more accurate at longer ranges, but they also found them more difficult to load. And they had a habit of occasionally going boom, according to one book I read, in the cannon occasionally. So they're a potential, but, you know, these things are interesting. Kyung Jung, hello. How prolific was the Harsha used in naval combat? How prolific was it? You see, how do I put this? There is certainly a desire to try and use the rocket systems, and the Washas are rocket systems. And if you've been watching my occasional Twitch games, there is my carriers in my fleet on Galactic Civilizations 4 are called Hawashas. Because, well, that's what they're doing. They're launching multiple aircraft. But the thing is, and I would say this, in actual naval combat time, there was a problem with using them. If you used them on ships too often, you could run the risk of burning the ship. You had to be very careful on the ship you're using them from. So you wanted to use them from a ship where you could allot a lot of space to them, because if they go off, they burn your own ship. So they were used, I understand it, but not that often because of the risks. It's like most weapon systems and most systems when you're using more ships. It's a cost-benefit analysis. It's a risk versus reward. This weapon could offer me a significant advantage, yes, but it's a significant risk. It's, again, with the Royal Navy, they tended to use, when they were using rocket ships, they tended to be smaller ships, which would specialize in the role, and would literally hang outside battle, or would tend to take part in sieges. And it's similar, I think, as I understood it with the Hwasha. I don't think they were ever used for an actual naval combat, but I could be wrong on that. Because, as said, there are limited books, and I have tried to read as many as I can to be as good as I can be, but there are new ones coming out all the time, and they are getting better. Oh, Night 6 everyone. Yi, when Yi died, it wasn't just morale in the Korean Navy that was affected. It was a morale in the Chinese forces. All the forces had an impact, because by that point he had become as much a token of victory as an actual real commander. The morale effect of him was he was kind of like Napoleon. It's, his value on the field is morale-wise is 10 times his value as an actual commander, but that morale value has an effect. See, Clarke, Eastern ship construction methods of the period, how does it compare to European ships like Mary Rose? Pretty good. It's different styles, but it's different styles based on their own technologies. You can see this when you start looking at these ships, even the recreations of these ships. You can see the difference in their construction. They are far more squared in some regards. They are tend to be built with very different timbers. And there's a difference in the seasoning process as well. But, they're well built. It's not exactly. If we go back to this one, we've got more pictures of them. As you can see here, it's to an extent, some of the construction does bring to mind some of the Viking hull construction, but it's far more improved. It's very much. It's very much building ships for their ease of maintenance within the situation they are being built for. Especially from the point of view of the Koreans. It's about infrastructure and benefiting infrastructure. Were those dart harpoon projectiles used to assist boarding? Not as far as I know, because honestly the Koreans are mainly using them to try and repel boarding and try and prevent it. Again, the Koreans realized very quickly that the Japanese kind of specialize in close quarter combat. And as skilled as the Koreans are, they do not have enough soldiery to be able to deal with that. They cannot fight a naval battle which is a boarding battle against the Japanese. The Japanese are far more prepared to take losses than they are. They have far more people to lose on that front than they are, and they have been spending and investing in their armed forces for a lot more than the Koreans have, so they have a lot more people who are experienced in combat. And again, we've discussed this on this channel, there is a value to veterancy. There is a value to having troops who are actually capable. vegetarians are carrying treats from Aldi. I think one of the instructions I'm supposed to get at is something a gluten-free dessert from Aldi, but there's also the fact that as said, I might be I might be having to restrict my spending quite heavily, because if I have to clear my completely clear my what's it called, overdraft, for us to get a mortgage, then I'm going to have to go on a very, very tight belts approach to things. A very, very tight belts approach to things. Most of the turtle ships that have been built, and there is a 1-to-1 scale turtle ship which has been built which is in the US, were made for the Korean drama The Immortal Admiral Yi Sin, and were rebuilt by a company for that. In terms of their construction, in terms of the wood used, that seems to be fairly standard for the Navy at the time, and so probably the same wood as we see on the Panakusin. They were built strong. They used pine for the hull and oak for the pegs and masts. Oak was considered strong but heavy, and was expensive, more difficult to get in the Korean Peninsula and the UK. Whereas pine was more easy to get, but it was allowed to incompletely season, so it would still be flexible in terms of bending and not being too stiff when applying. They had to be built of thicker timbers because of this, because pine usually had knots, and those can cause issues. They usually used oak pegs, though, rather than iron nails to hold them together. However, advantage of this is, as wood absorbs water, they expand, they don't rust, and they can actually make themselves stronger. But again, one of the interesting things is, we've talked about, they were listed as having various weapons added to them. But again, I would say the Japanese ships are definitely designed far more for open waters, but the Korean ships are designed to deal with the waters around Korea, and the Korean waters they have strong currents. They have strong currents indeed. I think I answered that lion's question of timber. And what killed off the turtle ship? Korean bureaucracy most often. I think, honestly, it's the Korean bureaucracy that kills it more. As I've said already in this video, and I'm gonna finish questions now, so I will say bot off. Questions live, gone, and the bot will be turned off. The bot is off. Yeah, I would say it was often the Korean bureaucracy which was more of a threat than anything else to it. Matthew Keeling, twice. Your question's been missed. What was the question? Go on. Just put it in the chat, and I'll read it out the chat. I'll do that nicely to you, because I know you have missed these. It literally come in at the end twice. And as said, after this, I will pause for a bit and go off and appear on Discord in a little bit later to chat with people. Discord link down below. You will find me in the general chat. Leslie 20. There's also value in quantity. Most of the Japanese bushai, at least in the second invasion, were new recruits. They were in the second invasion were mostly new recruits. But the thing is, they were also new recruits from a martial culture, which was turning them out in quite heavy details and had quite a lot of support going on, which again makes a difference. I was just noticing the bureaucracy killed the ships twice. Okay. Yeah, basically, that's the biggest problem for Koreans in defending Korea was the Korean government. Honestly, the Koreans produce, if they are like everyone, if they have got equivalent training and support and have got the proper infrastructure and support behind them and decent leadership, they are just as capable as anyone. But the trouble is, often those things were actually mitigating against them in these wars. That's why I call them bushai. Yeah. I know, Leslie. But I wanted to elaborate an answer. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching. What have we got coming up? Next Tuesday is the Battle of Toshima, from memory. Yeah. Wednesday might be Emperor Pertinax. And next Thursday is... What is next Thursday? Next Thursday is 40 minutes AM World War II. Pom-pom or both of them? Pardon me. That should be a fun one, because it's going to basically be me going, this is what one does, this is what the other does, let's look at some of the options and their actions. And do you want it for this? Do you want pom-pom or both for this? But it's fun. And of course we have brew ships on Sunday. It should be fun. It should be fun. There's going to be a lot of questions, I think. A lot of discussions for that one. Ooh. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's useful. Sorry. I've just had a notification from Patreon that iOS checkout changes have come in as a win for Patreon and people who are doing Patreon. That's good. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and hope you found it interesting. I know I've always found this stuff to be intriguing to go and look at these things, because there is so much else you can learn by going and looking at these different parts of history. And it's not my natural area, it's not the area I grew up necessarily learning about, but it's an area which I always enjoyed teaching because of that. I am one of those, a kind of a strange academic, in that I fervently believe, and will always fervently believe, that you're actually usually better at teaching areas which aren't your specialist research area, because in your area of specialist research, you know so much, you start to automatically presume other people know more than they actually do. Because of course they know this, because I've known this for years. And you have to be very careful of that. I try to be good when I'm teaching aircraft carriers and naval aviation. I try to be good, and I try to remember that not everyone has spent 20 odd years studying it, and the same when it comes to destroyers and their tactics. Again, I try and remember not everyone spent 20 odd years studying it and writing about it. And same with cruisers and all these things in the 1920s, 30s, and going on to modern day. But I'm not sure I'm always successful in that. But the thing is, the moment I'm studying, going through an area which isn't necessarily my specialist area, but an area of I have knowledge of because I teach it, I have the thing of, oh yeah, I remember learning that bit was interesting to me, and that bit's still, I'm always trying to find out more about that because I'm never 100% sure on these sort of things, which means I feel you're a better teacher when you're more of a student. When you're slightly further along and you're sort of a more of a advanced student, because I honestly believe, again, the moment you stop learning is the moment you should stop teaching, because you always need to be learning in order to be able to think. Well, what does someone need to do? How does someone going to be able to understand this to learn it? When you're more further down that path, you might not be as good at approaching people who are, let's say, haven't even started on that path. No, Raptor, I agree with your wife. I agree. A 20mm twin mount on your balcony is not going to be a good thing for your house. I think that might end up with a lot of people coming in from the police and other people asking questions. And if I remember correctly, you live in America where there's things called homeowners associations. I have a feeling your local homeowners association might be upset with you on that one. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Hope to see you again soon, and hope you enjoyed the video. Take care. Bye. And sorry again about the mangled Japanese, Korean and Japanese. Raptor, if you're in the Netherlands, you definitely can't do that. And if you rent, you most definitely cannot have a 20mm. No. No. Bad, Raptor. Bad. You're not getting that in the Netherlands. In America, you might be able to get away with it, but no. No. Not happening.